In today's video, we explore Verrotwood, the folk horror tabletop skirmish game set in a hostile, blighted forest. Well, hi folks, and welcome to the channel. I'm Lee, your old hammered host. Today we're going to take a quick look at Verrotwood, the folk horror indie skirmish game by Mike Cratchit, which is currently a best-selling title at Wargame Vault and has been for some time now. Quick disclaimer, please take everything that follows with a grain of salt. I have read the Verrotwood rules, but there is always room for misinterpretation. Verrotwood is a low model count, miniatures agnostic narrative game set in a corrupted forest inhabited by bizarre cults and terrifying creatures of myth and legend. The Verrotwood PDF rulebook is only $9, and there is already a free supplement called The Village and the Hare, which contains 2 solo scenarios and additional material. I will put a link to Verrotwood in the video description below in case you're interested. So when I think of the folk horror genre, I imagine fictional characters like Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane, and movies like The Wicker Man, Lair of the White Worm, Children of the Corn, etc., where followers of ancient gods are still kicking it old school and keeping their traditions alive. So on one hand, Verrotwood is chock full of folk horror elements, and on the other, it takes place in a very specific setting, a blighted, grotesque, mutating forest full of gloom, muck, decay, and madness, where an unseen corruption is twisting nature itself. I'm not sure if there's an official term for this mythos, gloom punk, mold punk, rot punk, root punk, but other indie games like Turnip 28 and The Weald seem to be tapping into the same earthy, fungal, rotting tuber aesthetic. Prior to the corruption setting in, however, Verrotwood was simply a vast, dense, untamed forest that, despite being somewhat inhospitable, was still home to a number of scattered villages and settlements. The hard-working residents of Verrotwood were simple, superstitious folk, but they shared a common religion, their deity was benevolent, and life in the wood was bearable more or less. However, one horrific day, apocalyptic bells rang in the skies above Verrotwood. The clouds darkened, crops withered, birds went silent, and old slumbering nightmares began to awaken in the depths of the now rotting forest. Starving, forsaken, and half-mad with terror, Verrotwood's surviving inhabitants began turning to foul entities and unspeakable rites, hoping to earn favor and ritual points, which act as currency and magical power in their cursed woodland hell. We'll talk about both of those here shortly. So in Verrotwood, each player commands a frothing, raggedy cult of up to 4 adherents who have decided to revere some cold, horrible intelligence whispering deep in the forest. The rulebook encourages players to be as creative as they like when imagining their cult's ghastly benefactor. Fledgling cultists start with strength, dexterity, intelligence, and defense attributes of 1, as well as 10 hit points. However, cultists can and should boost their stats, as well as purchase weapons and equipment by spending favor, which they earn by serving the whims of their terrible forest patron. In a one-off game, the rules recommend that each cult start with 500 favor, while in campaign games, new cults start with 300 favor and can earn more by defeating enemies and securing objectives. When spending favor, 50 favor will let a cult increase a single stat of a single cultist by 1 point. 75 favor will let you increase one cultist's hit points by 5. 15 favor will get you a flask of poison. 10 favor will purchase a light bladed weapon, while a bow will cost you 20 favor. You can also purchase heavy blades, blunt weapons, pole weapons, and crossbows with favor, making your cultists much more effective in combat. If favor is in short supply, however, the forest is fortunately littered with improvised weapons, presumably jagged rocks, bones, and sticks, which cost you nothing. Verrotwood uses a random activation sequence. Each cultist is represented by a specific token or a piece of paper, and during the round, those tokens are drawn one by one from a bag of flayed human skin, or whatever you have handy, until each cultist has activated. After all cultists on the table have activated, the game goes to the next round and the process is repeated. Once activated, each cultist can take up to 2 points worth of actions in any sequence they like, but they can't take the same action twice in one round. Move, melee attack, ranged attack, and ritual, which is kind of like spellcasting, are all 1-point actions, while run and pray are 2-point actions, Run lets a figure move up to 1.5 times its normal movement, so a cultist who normally moves 6 inches could run up to 9 inches. And Pray adds ritual points to the cult's balance, which we'll talk about here in a second, though it does leave the praying model vulnerable to attack. Okay, so rituals are perhaps the most important element in Verrotwood, since they give cultists that crucial edge when confronting rival fanatics or trying to meet victory conditions. Each cult gets to select 4 rituals that it can perform, which represent their patron's ability to influence the mortal world. There are roughly 60 rituals to choose from in Verrotwood, each of which costs a certain number of ritual points to execute during the game. The rules suggest selecting rituals that fit in with the theme of your cult, so a gang of muscle-bound cannibals would probably practice different rituals than a cadre of nimble, poison-wielding hunters. As I said, each ritual costs a certain number of ritual points to perform. At the beginning of the game, you can choose to have each player roll for a random number of ritual points to start with, or you can skip that step and just give each cult 20 points. Your cultists can also, as I mentioned, generate ritual points during the game by taking a prayer action. Here are just a few of the many forbidden rituals that your cultists might employ and enjoy during their adventures in the rotting forest. Regurgitated Crow is a 4-point ritual that lets you make a ranged attack on any model, ignoring range, line of sight, and cover bonuses. Stench of Death is a 5-point ritual that pushes every model within 4 inches straight back another 4. Hex is a 7-point ritual that makes an enemy use the lowest value die result every time they roll dice until the end of the round, and that's really mean. Corrupted Ground is an 11-point ritual that turns any piece of terrain into wicked terrain for the rest of the scenario. Altered Destiny is a 15-point ritual that moves an objective token up to 4 inches in any direction, which is pretty handy if you're trying to seize it. And Greater Summon is a 20-point ritual that manifests a powerful avatar of your cult's patron, which you can turn upon your enemies. Combat in Verrotwood is relatively simple. The game uses a D10 die pool system, where each combat advantage gives your cultist an additional die to roll, though no matter how many dice they're rolling, you just pick the single highest result. Let's say this cultist here has a strength of 2 and a heavy-bladed weapon, and he is attacking this other cultist who has a defense of 2 and is lying on the ground. The defending model is prone, so the attacker gets to add another D10 to his attack pool. Then both parties roll their dice and select their highest die roll. Here the attack was successful, and since heavy blades do 8 points of damage, the defender's hit points are reduced by 8. If the defender in this case was being shot at, however, instead of being attacked in close combat, he would get an additional defense die for being prone, and 1 more for being in forest terrain. So he would roll a total of 4 dice for his defense and pick the best one. And speaking of terrain, the environment plays a very important role in Verrotwood. The game is designed with a 3x3 area in mind, and the rules recommend that at least 3/4 of that surface be covered in terrain. As part of that terrain, at least 1/4 of the whole table should be covered in forest. Other types of terrain include blocking terrain, cover terrain, haunted terrain, hallowed ground, because sadly you cannot perform your forbidden rituals near the ruins of the old temple. Then there's burning terrain, poisonous terrain, and the much feared wicked terrain, which beckons to the weak-willed, drawing them to their doom. Verrotwood is also filled with hostile game-controlled creatures, which can add an extra layer of mayhem to your conflicts if you wish. These include mutated forest beasts in the spirit of Man-Bear Pig, shambling moss-covered reanimates, giant arachnids, forest madmen, hostile spirits, and other dangerous watchers in the woods. Verrotwood's forest creatures follow the rule of cruel, which means all other things being equal, they will choose the path of maximum violence and chaos. So cultists need to proceed carefully if there happens to be a giant rabid boar foraging near their coveted objective. While Verrotwood can certainly be played as a one-off game, the campaign mode allows cults to become more deadly over time as they boost their stats and acquire better equipment. Along the way, however, many cultists will invariably die or become maimed. No matter though, the forest is filled with hungry new replacements willing to join your cult for free. After each game, any cultist knocked out of action must roll on the injury table to see the extent of their wounds. Possible results include outcomes such as a broken leg, a lost eye, or even the sweet release of death. Some cultists will even survive the experience relatively unscathed and arise battle-hardened as a result. After all injuries have been resolved, next the cult selects one lucky adherent to explore the post-game forest, looking for gear or favor. This search is resolved by drawing a playing card from a standard deck. Drawing a 2 or 3 means the cultist has been injured during his exploration. 4 through 10 typically means something useful is found. A face card, however, usually results in a gruesome encounter that the cultist is unlikely to survive, though sometimes there are rewards to be had. And finally, a cult may choose to spend all or some of the favor it has accumulated to beef up its stats, buy things like incense, oil, mort shrooms, and or deadlier weapons, and generally gear up for their next big misadventure. Okay folks, that is our quick look at Verrotwood, a folk horror indie skirmish game set in a post-cataclysm forest. If you have any thoughts on Verrotwood or the recent spate of corrupted vegetation-style games, please leave a comment in the comment section. It is an intriguing genre, and I'm interested to hear what you think about it. We'll be back soon with some more tabletop wargaming weirdness, but until then, take care of yourselves and watch out for those mutated turnips.